La Modelo Prison Riot, Colombia, 2020. It's March 21st, 2020, the year COVID-19 spread like wildfire, cities turned into ghost towns, and hospitals overflowed. But inside Bogota's La Modelo prison, things were somehow even worse. Prisoners at the correctional facility weren't plotting a jailbreak or starting a fight. They just wanted to survive the pandemic. It was meant to be a simple protest. La Modelo was already filled to the brim with about 5,000 inmates packed like sardines, six to a cell, some sleeping in the hallways like it was a budget hostel with no checkout time. Hygiene was a mess. Health precautions didn't exist in the place. COVID wasn't just a risk, it was basically being invited in with open arms. So when the protest began, there was no violence, just shouting, banging, smoke. Then the guards responded by opening fire on the inmates. Well, that pushed the inmates to retaliate with violence. Chaos spread fast and fires broke out, and within minutes, the prison turned into a war zone. By morning, 24 inmates were dead, another 107 people were injured, including 31 guards and 76 detainees. And here's where it gets darker. A later investigation found that most of the inmates weren't killed by stray bullets, they were intentionally shot by the police. The government, for its part, claimed it was never about COVID protests. They called it a coordinated escape attempt, part of a larger plan involving disturbances in 13 prisons across the country. But the inmates told a different story. To them, it was about overcrowding, filth, and the total lack of protection from COVID, inside a system that had already failed them long before the virus arrived. Apodaca Prison Riot, Venezuela, 2019. If you thought Colombia's prisons were full, just wait until you hear about Venezuela, just to the north of Colombia. In May 2019, at a police station jail in Apodaca, Venezuela, tensions were simmering like a pressure cooker set to explode. A station jail was only meant to hold about 60 people for short stays, just a few days at most, but instead, it was crammed with around 500 inmates. That's more than 8 times what it was built for. This facility was intended to hold detainees for no more than 48 hours. However, due to systematic issues with Venezuela's penal system, many individuals were held far longer than intended, sleeping in overcrowded, unsafe conditions. Overcrowding was the norm in Venezuela's detention centers, but this was just beyond. For about 10 days before the violence erupted, inmates in the Apodaca jail had been holding peaceful protests. Their main demand was simple. They didn't want to be transferred to distant prisons far from their families. These remote transfers would cut them off from family visits, which are a critical source of support, emotional stability, and sometimes even basic necessities like food and personal items. When their requests were ignored, tensions rose rapidly. Things reached a breaking point when their protest leader, Wilfredo Ramos, who had publicly asked the authorities for better treatment, was killed under unclear circumstances. His death ignited anger and desperation, quickly turning protests into a violent and deadly confrontation. And, the next morning, all hell broke loose. Around 5:50 a.m., the city of Apodaca woke up to the sound of nonstop gunfire and explosions. For nearly 6 hours, the streets echoed with the chaos coming from inside the jail. Inmates were armed, some had guns, others even had grenades, and they fought back fiercely as police, National Guard troops, and special forces stormed in. By the time the dust had settled, 29 inmates were dead. Many were shot at close range, and some bodies showed signs of extreme violence. 19 officers were also injured during the clash. Officials later claimed it was all part of a planned escape, saying inmates tried to break through a hole in the wall and then turned violent. But human rights groups and eyewitnesses questioned that version of the story, pointing to the extreme force used and the number of prisoners killed. New Mexico State Penitentiary Riot, 1980. On February 2nd, 1980, a violent riot erupted at the Penitentiary of New Mexico, PNM, becoming one of the deadliest prison riots in U.S. history. It didn't just happen overnight, this was years in the making. The prison was severely overcrowded, and conditions inside were awful. Programs meant to rehabilitate inmates, like education and recreation, had been cut in 1975. Prisoners spent long hours locked inside their cells, and frustration turned into anger. They had protested these conditions before, but instead of solutions, inmates were beaten and punished, causing tension to keep building. The riot began during a routine cell check when 2 prisoners overpowered a guard. They took his keys and radio, quickly capturing more officers. Guards panicked and fled without securing doors, allowing inmates to release fellow prisoners. Soon, inmates had full control. What happened next was chaos. Prisoners smashed windows, set mattresses on fire, and armed themselves with makeshift weapons. But the most horrifying act was between the inmates themselves. Prisoners who had previously snitched to the authorities were brutally attacked, tortured, or burned alive. By the time authorities regained control, 33 inmates were dead, over 200 injured, and the prison lay in ruins. 12 officers had been taken hostage. Though all survived, they endured severe abuse, leaving lifelong scars. The riot forced major changes across U.S. prisons, but the trauma and memories lingered for longer than the 36-hour nightmare itself. Attica Prison Riot, USA, 1971. On September 9, 1971, inmates at Attica Correctional Facility in New York staged one of America's most infamous prison rebellions. The riots started because prisoners were fed up with poor living conditions, mistreatment, and being denied basic human rights. They felt they were being treated more like animals than humans. That morning, a small miscommunication triggered the chaos. Prison officials had changed the daily schedule but forgot to inform the guard in charge of moving prisoners to the exercise yard. When inmates realized the guard was unaware of what was happening, they took advantage and quickly overpowered him. Within moments, inmates had control of the prison. They seized weapons, captured 42 staff members as hostages, and demanded better treatment, including humane conditions and basic rights. Negotiations dragged on for 4 tense days, but instead of finding a peaceful solution, authorities decided to storm the prison with state police. The officers attacked violently, firing guns into crowds of inmates and hostages alike. When it was over, 39 people lay dead, including 10 prison staff hostages. Shockingly, it was later discovered that the hostages had all been killed by police bullets, not inmates. The state initially tried to cover this up, but autopsies proved otherwise. The incident sparked outrage across the nation, leading surviving prisoners to sue New York State. They eventually won an $8 million settlement, marking a significant moment in prison reform history. Apodaca Prison Riot, Mexico, 2012. When cartels play chess behind bars, things don't just get messy, they get savage real fast. On February 19, 2012, a violent attack took place in Mexico's Apodaca Prison. Although officially called a riot, it was actually a planned attack carried out by members of the Los Zetas drug cartel against their rivals, the Gulf Cartel. At the time, Apodaca Prison was severely overcrowded. Built to hold about 1,500 inmates, it housed nearly 3,000, creating conditions ripe for trouble. Under the cover of night, members of the Los Zetas gang, reportedly helped by corrupt guards and prison officials, entered cells holding Gulf Cartel prisoners. Armed with knives, clubs, and improvised weapons, they attacked mercilessly. The violence was shocking. Inmates were stabbed, beaten, strangled, and even thrown from upper floors. Some were decapitated. By morning, 44 Gulf Cartel members were dead. During the chaos, 30 Los Zetas members managed to escape the prison, raising immediate suspicion about inside help. Investigations soon revealed the shocking truth. Corrupt officials, including the prison director, deputy director, chief of security, and 26 guards had assisted the attack and breakout. All were arrested and charged. The Apodaca massacre exposed deep corruption within Mexico's prison system and highlighted the frightening influence drug cartels had behind bars. Anísio Jobim Prison Riot, Brazil, 2017. In January 2017, Brazil kicked off the new year with something a little more apocalyptic than fireworks, a prison massacre. At the Anísio Jobim Penitentiary complex in Manaus, not one, not two, but 3 violent riots erupted between rival gangs. Familia do Norte, FDN, and Primeiro Comando de Capital, PCC. The rivalry wasn't new, it was a turf war. The PCC had aggressively expanded its drug trafficking network across Brazil, seizing control. As a result, FDN and CV, Comando Vermelho, which allied, saw this control as a threat to their own decentralized power. This clash of rival drug empires finally exploded violently within Brazil's overcrowded prisons. On January 1st, FDN inmates launched a coordinated attack against PCC rivals. 56 prisoners were killed on the first day alone, and this wasn't quick or quiet. The riot lasted 17 hours, during which inmates took 12 prison staff members hostage. The confrontations were marked by extreme brutality as victims were tortured, beheaded, and dismembered. Days later, the PCC retaliated at the Agricultural Penitentiary of Monte Cristo in Roraima, killing 33 FDN-linked inmates. This tit-for-tat violence continued, spreading terror through Brazil's overcrowded prisons. Uribana Prison Riot, Venezuela, 2013. Now back to Venezuela in Uribana Prison. It was designed to hold 850 inmates. Instead, it held nearly 2,500, like trying to fit a football team into a phone booth and then wondering why they snapped. Overcrowded, underfunded, and ruled more by gangs than guards, it was already a disaster waiting to happen. Then, out of the blue, officials decided on a full-scale raid to find hidden weapons and contraband. But someone let the cat out of the bag, tipping off the inmates ahead of time. Suddenly, every prisoner knew exactly what was headed their way, and they weren't planning a warm welcome. On January 25, 2013, when National Guard troops showed up to begin the operation, they not only found the inmates' weapons, but also had to defend themselves from them. Armed inmates resisted violently, and within minutes, the prison turned into a war zone. Gunshots tore through the corridors. Chaos erupted. By the time it was over, at least 61 people were dead, more than 120 injured. It was one of the deadliest prison clashes in Venezuelan history, and none of it was random. Authorities later evacuated the prison entirely, citing the need for investigation and rehabilitation, but let's be honest, moving the inmates didn't fix the system. Human rights groups called out the real issues being overcrowding, lack of oversight, and a prison culture where gangs ruled. El Porvenir Prison Riot, Honduras, 2003. April 5, 2003, started out like any other tense day inside El Porvenir Prison, Honduras. It held suspects awaiting trial for everything from assault to drug trafficking. But the real threat wasn't the crimes. They were still waiting for their verdicts. The danger came from within. Fierce tension between the paisas, non-gang inmates, and the infamous Mara 18 gang. Everything exploded when Mario Cerrato, aka El Boris, a high-ranking Mara 18 leader, challenged the prison's internal order. After a confrontation with security chief Edgardo Coca, where Coca's deputy was killed and Coca injured, a full-blown riot broke out. Chaos spread instantly. A special police unit stormed the facility, supposedly to restore control, but what happened next went far beyond riot control. Reports say many gang members surrendered, but were executed anyway. One of the darkest moments came when a cell holding over 40 men was set on fire, and survivors say they were shot as they tried to escape. The fire spread fast. Flames ripped through the prison while authorities scrambled and firefighters struggled to contain it. It took hours before the blaze was out, and by then the damage was done. At least 68 people died, mostly Mara 18 members, but tragically, even 2 women and a young girl visiting that day were caught in the slaughter. Carandiru Massacre, Brazil, 1992. On October 2, 1992, what began as a prison fight turned into one of the deadliest prison riots in Brazil's modern history. Inside Sao Paulo's overcrowded Carandiru Penitentiary, built for 3,000 but holding over 7,000 inmates, talk about overpopulation. That day, the spark came after a football match when a fight broke out between 2 inmate factions in cell block 9. The scuffle escalated fast. Prisoners armed themselves with knives and pipes. With just 15 guards overseeing over 2,000 inmates in that wing, control slipped away quickly. At 2:15 p.m., the prison director called in military police. The specialized assault team were given the green light to storm the building and had a reputation for using extreme violence. Negotiation was barely attempted. Instead, 341 officers entered the prison and unleashed brutal force. In less than 30 seconds, they killed a whopping 111 prisoners, mostly on the first 2 floors. Many victims were shot while surrendering, with hands raised or behind their heads. Shockingly, not even a single officer was injured. What made it worse? Most inmates hadn't even been convicted yet. They were awaiting trial. The country, and the world, was horrified. Human rights groups condemned it as a massacre. Legal proceedings followed, and in 2013, multiple officers were convicted and sentenced to hundreds of years, but in 2016, those convictions were overturned. To this day, none of the officers have served jail time. One unexpected outcome of Carandiru? Survivors united and formed Primeiro Comando de Capital, PCC, now one of Brazil's most powerful criminal organizations. The prison was demolished in 2002. A park now stands where the walls once did, but the memory of what happened. Penitenciaria del Litoral, Ecuador, September 2021. The final riot on our list isn't just another prison riot, it's the deadliest one of them all. A horrific event so severe it makes the others look tame by comparison. Brace yourself, because this is where things get truly devastating. In September 2021, Ecuador faced the most deadly prison riot in history at the Litoral Penitentiary in Guayaquil. The chaos erupted on September 28th when inmates from one section of the overcrowded prison managed to sneak into a rival gang's wing through a hole in the wall. What started as a gang-on-gang attack quickly turned into a bloodbath involving guns, shanks, and even explosives. The violence was shocking. 118 prisoners died, and at least 79 more were seriously injured. Many victims were brutally beaten, stabbed, or shot at close range, highlighting the severity and ruthlessness of the clash. This wasn't about prisoners protesting bad conditions. It was pure gang warfare, with groups like Los Choneros and Los Lobos fighting fiercely for control within the prison walls. The Ecuadorian authorities had to send in around 900 police officers and soldiers to regain control of the facility. In a dramatic rescue effort, officers managed to save several cooks who had been trapped in the kitchen during the riot, terrified and hiding as violence unfolded around them. After the deadly incident, Ecuador's president even declared a nationwide prison emergency, recognizing how deeply gangs had infiltrated the prison system and how urgently reforms were needed. He even went ahead and approved pardons for about 2,000 low-risk inmates to ease overcrowding, an attempt to stop future violence by giving inmates a little more breathing room. This devastating event spotlighted not just Ecuador's prison crisis, but also the chilling power gangs held inside prison walls, turning penitentiaries into battlegrounds. So what did we just witness? Not just a list of riots, but a pattern. A pattern of broken systems, neglected people, and consequences that keep repeating. Prisons are supposed to contain and rehabilitate problems, not create them. But time and time again, we've seen what happens when warning signs are ignored. Want to explore more stories like this? Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to always be on the lookout for more interesting content.